The stars were dying one by one, and Admiral Velthar could do nothing but watch. From the command deck of the massive warship Eternal Harmony, he stared at the tactical display that showed the death of his civilization. Red dots moved across the holographic map like drops of blood spreading through water. Each red dot was a Vorthok bioship. Each one carried thousands of hungry creatures that wanted only to consume and grow. The Zilani Confederation had ruled this part of space for 3,000 years. 12 different alien species had joined together in peace. They shared their knowledge, their technology, and their dreams. They built beautiful cities on crystal worlds. They created art that could make stars sing. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The Vorthok swarm came from the void between galaxies. Nobody knew where they really came from or why they were so hungry. They just ate everything. Planets, moons, entire star systems disappeared into their massive bioships. The creatures turned everything they ate into more of themselves. More ships, more warriors, more hunger. Velthor's 4 eyes watched another Confederation ship die. The Asterisk Bright. Dawn Asterisk had been beautiful once, with white armor that gleamed like pearl. Now it was being torn apart by creatures that looked like metal spiders the size of buildings. The ship's hull cracked open like an egg, and air rushed out in frozen clouds. "Admiral," said Communications Officer Thexoni. Her voice shook with fear she was trying to hide. "We just lost the Silver Wind and the Stars Singer. The 4th defense line is broken." Velthor nodded slowly. His long fingers gripped the command chair. In 6 months, the swarm had eaten 43 star systems. Billions of people were dead. Entire worlds were gone, turned into gray dust that fed the bio-ships. The bridge shook as weapons fire hit their shields. Through the main window, Velthar could see the enemy ships. They were not built like normal spaceships. They looked alive, with thick skin instead of metal armor. They pulsed, like giant hearts. Long tentacles reached out to grab smaller ships and pull them close to feeding mouths full of rotating teeth. "Sir," said Weapons Officer Crawleth, "our main guns are down to 30% power. We cannot keep fighting much longer." Velthar looked at the tactical display again. His fleet had started with 800 ships. Now only 43 remained. The math was simple and horrible. Even if every shot they fired destroyed an enemy ship, there would always be more. The swarm seemed endless. A young officer ran to Thexoni with a message pad. She read it quickly, and her face went pale. "Admiral," she said quietly, "message from the Confederation Council. They order immediate retreat to the core worlds." The words hit Velthor like a physical blow. Retreat meant abandoning the outer systems. It meant letting millions more people die, while the Council hoped the inner defenses would hold, but he knew they would not. The core worlds had strong shields and powerful weapons, but the swarm would just grow bigger by eating everything between, here and there. "Sir." Thexoni was waiting for his answer. Velthor closed his 4 eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, his voice was steady but sad. "Send a final distress call," he said. "All frequencies, every corner of the galaxy." Vexani looked confused. "Sir, we have already sent requests for help to all our allies. The Catherian Empire is too far away. The Moth Collective is fighting their own war. Nobody else has ships that could send it everywhere," Velthar interrupted. "Even to the primitive sectors. Even to species that just learned to travel between stars." The communications officer wanted to argue. What could primitive aliens do that advanced civilizations could not? But she saw the look in her admiral's eyes and obeyed. The message went out in 1,000 different languages and formats. It traveled through hyperspace relays and quantum tunnels. It bounced off ancient satellites and passed through cosmic storms. Most of the galaxy ignored it or could not understand it, but in a small, quiet part of space, near a young yellow star, a listening post picked up the signal. The third planet from that star was mostly water and rock. The creatures living there had only learned to travel faster than light 6 months ago. They called themselves humans, and they were very new to the galaxy. The automated systems on their listening post recorded the message and sent it to their homeworld. Deep in the message, buried in technical data about fleet positions and weapon types, was something simple and desperate. Please help us. We are dying, and we do not want our children to die too. On the bridge of the Eternal Harmony, Admiral Velthar ordered the retreat. His remaining ships turned away from the battle and began their jump to hyperspace. Behind them, the Vorthog swarm settled down to feed on the wreckage, growing stronger for the next attack. In the darkness of space, their message traveled toward Earth. Admiral Jin Sato had never imagined that humanity's first contact with aliens would be a cry for help from the dying. He stood in the Great Hall of the United Earth Council, looking at the faces of world leaders who held the future of two species in their hands. Behind him, on the massive screen, played the alien message that had arrived 3 days ago. Strange creatures with 4 eyes and long fingers spoke in musical voices about death and hunger and the end of everything they loved. Show them the fleet analysis again, said Council President Yoon-hye. Her voice was cold and practical. The screen changed to show humanity's entire space fleet. 40 ships hung in Earth's orbit like tiny metal insects against the black of space. They were beautiful in their own way, sleek and silver, but they were also very small. The biggest ship, Jin's flagship New Seoul, was only 800 meters long. The alien ships in the distress message were the size of small cities. 40 ships, President Yoon-hye said slowly. 20,000 crew members, against an enemy that has destroyed civilizations that ruled space for thousands of years. Defense Minister Parkman stood up from his seat. He was an old man who had lived through 3 wars on Earth. The aliens say this swarm has eaten 43 star systems. Entire worlds are gone. What can we do that they could not? Admiral Jin felt the weight of every eye in the room. These people had chosen him to lead humanity's first journey to the stars. 6 months ago, that had seemed like the greatest honor possible. Now it felt like carrying the hopes of his entire species into certain death. The math is simple, President Yoon-hye continued. We cannot win this fight. Our weapons are primitive compared to theirs. Our ships are smaller and slower. Why should humanity die for strangers we have never met? A murmur ran through the council chamber. Jin heard fear in those voices, and he understood it. For 50 years, humans had dreamed of finding other life in the universe. They had imagined making friends among the stars, sharing knowledge and culture. They had not imagined being asked to die in an alien war. But Jin remembered the face of the alien admiral in the message. 4 eyes filled with sadness and desperation. A father watching his children face death and knowing he could not save them. Jin's jaw tightened. Because it's right, he said, and his voice carried across the silent chamber. Because when we learned we weren't alone in the universe, we hoped to find friends, not watch them be murdered. Pretty words, said Economic Minister Lee Sol. But words won't stop this swarm. We have families too, Admiral. Should we make our children orphans for the sake of aliens? Jin walked closer to the council seats. 6 months ago, we sent our first message to the stars. Do you remember what we said? We said that humanity comes in peace, that we want to learn and grow and help make the universe a better place. He paused. Were those just empty words? President Yoon-hye frowned. This is different. This is war. Yes, Jin agreed. It's war, and somewhere out there, people are dying who never did anything wrong except ask for help. If we turn our backs on them now, what does that make us? The debate went on for hours. Some council members argued that humanity was too young, too weak, too unprepared. Others said that running away from the first challenge would make them cowards forever. They talked about duty and survival, about courage and common sense. Finally, President Yoon-hye called for a vote. The chamber fell silent as the electronic votes came in. Jin watched the numbers change on the screen, his heart beating fast. 30 votes against helping, 35 votes for helping, 2 abstentions. Then Council Member Kim Dar changed her vote. 36 for helping, 36 against. 1 vote left. President Yoon-hye looked at Jin for a long moment. Then she entered her vote. 30-7 for helping. May God forgive us if we're wrong, she said quietly. 3 days later, Jin stood on the bridge of the New Seoul as his small fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the Kepler Nexus. Through the main window, he could see the wreckage of a great battle. Broken ships floated like dead fish in an ocean of stars. Some of the wreckage was clearly alien technology, but much of it looked organic, like pieces of giant sea creatures. "Sir," said his communications officer, Lieutenant Hannah Kim, "I'm picking up signals from surviving alien ships. They're asking us why we came." Jin looked at the tactical display. 15 alien ships, all damaged, all running low on power. His own 40 ships looked tiny next to them, but they were intact and ready to fight. "Open a channel," he ordered. A face appeared on the screen. 4 eyes, just like in the message, but these eyes were wider, with surprise and hope. "Why?" the alien asked, in accented but clear English. "Why did you come?" Captain Na Yeon, commanding Jin's lead destroyer, answered before he could speak. "Because you asked," she said simply. The Vorthok swarm came like a wave of death across the starfield. Admiral Velthar watched from the bridge of his damaged flagship as thousands of bioships moved toward them. The creatures moved in perfect order, like parts of a single giant machine. Each ship knew exactly where the others were going. They had learned this coordination by eating hundreds of other species over thousands of years. "They're going to hit us in formation," Velthar told Admiral Jin Sato over the communication link. "Standard attack pattern. They'll focus fire on our largest ships first, then work down to smaller targets. We should arrange our fleet in defensive positions, and no," Jin interrupted. "We're going to do something different." Before Veltor could ask what he meant, the human ships scattered in all directions like frightened birds. Some flew toward the asteroid field that both sides had marked as too dangerous to enter. Others dove below the main battle area. A few actually flew straight at the swarm ships, which made no sense at all. Commander Bo Hyun pushed his destroyer Soul's Pride toward the asteroid field at full speed. His navigation officer, Lieutenant Min Jae, stared at him with wide eyes. "Sir, the field is marked as impassable. The rocks are moving too fast. The gravity fields will crush us." Bo Hyun grinned. "That's what they think too." The Soul's Pride plunged into the asteroid field just as the first swarm ships reached the battle area. The destroyer was much smaller than the alien warships, and it could turn and twist in ways the big bioships could not. Bo Hyun flew between rocks the size of moons, using their gravity to slingshot his ship into impossible positions. "Missile launch," he called out. Rockets shot out from the destroyer's sides, bouncing off asteroids and changing direction in ways that confused the swarm's targeting computers. The bioships tried to follow, but they were too big and moved too slowly. When they fired back, their weapons hit the asteroids instead of the human ship. On another part of the battlefield, Captain Haewon was doing something even stranger. Her light cruiser Bison's Dream was flying in circles around a group of swarm ships, never staying in one place long enough for them to target her properly. Every few seconds, she would fire her weapons, and then immediately change direction. "This is impossible," muttered Swarm Ship Mind 47. The creature had absorbed the knowledge of 12 different species, but it had never seen anything like this. "They have no pattern, no coordination. How can they fight without proper formation?" The answer was that humans had learned to fight wars on a planet where they were the only intelligent species. They had spent thousands of years fighting each other, and that had taught them to be tricky and unpredictable. Alien species fought in formation because it was efficient and logical. Humans fought like each ship was trying to survive on its own. Admiral Velthor watched in amazement as human fighters performed maneuvers that should have killed their pilots. The small ships spun and rolled and dove in ways that created forces strong enough to turn a person into liquid. But somehow, the human pilots survived and kept fighting. "How are they not dead?" he asked his science officer. "I think," the officer said slowly, "their bodies are built differently than ours. They can handle more physical stress." Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Juan Park was working frantically in the engine room of the new Sol. Around him, his team was doing something that would have horrified any alien engineer. They were taking human fusion reactors and connecting them directly to alien shield generators, mixing technologies that were never meant to work together. "Sir," called out Engineer Su Jin, "the power levels are all wrong. The alien systems use completely different energy frequencies. Then we'll make our own frequency." One Park shouted over the noise of welding torches. "If we can't match their firepower, we'll confuse their targeting systems." The hybrid weapons that resulted from this desperate engineering should not have worked. Human technology was hundreds of years behind alien science, but the combination created energy signatures that the swarm had never seen before. Their bioships had evolved to adapt to predictable alien tactics, learning from each battle and becoming stronger, but they could not adapt to something completely random. Swarm Ship Mind 23 fired its main weapon at a human cruiser, but the shot missed completely. The human ship's shields were creating some kind of interference that made targeting impossible. The bioship tried to adjust, but by the time it figured out the new pattern, the human ship had changed again. For the first time in months, the swarm began to take serious damage. Human ships were small and weak compared to the bioships, but they were hitting targets that the aliens had thought were safe. The perfectly coordinated swarm formation started to break apart as individual ships tried to deal with enemies that would not follow any logical pattern. "Admiral," Communications Officer Vexani said to Velthor, her voice filled with wonder, "the swarm is retreating from Sector 7. They're confused." Admiral Jin Sato's voice came over the communication link, calm and steady. "Admiral Velthor, I think we're ready to try something really crazy." The tide of battle was beginning to turn. "You want to do what?" Admiral Velthor's 4 eyes blinked rapidly as his translator tried to make sense of the human words. Admiral Jin Sato stood in the war room of the combined fleet, pointing at the holographic display that showed the massive swarm command vessel. The bioship was 10 kilometers long and looked like a giant brain with tentacles. It pulsed with a sickly green light that made everyone in the room feel uncomfortable. "We plant a virus in their central consciousness," Jin repeated, "not to destroy it, to give them choice." Velthor's head tilted in confusion. "I do not understand. A virus that does not destroy. What purpose would that serve?" Captain Na Yan stepped forward. She had been studying the swarm's communication patterns for hours. "Admiral Velthor, have you ever wondered why the swarm moves so perfectly together? Why they never argue or disagree or make individual decisions?" "They are a hive mind," Velthor said slowly, "like some insects on my homeworld. They think as one being." "But what if they weren't always like that?" Jin asked. "What if they chose to become a hive mind? And what if we could help them remember how to choose for themselves again?" The alien Admiral looked doubtful, but he had learned not to question human ideas too quickly. Their strange tactics had already saved his fleet once. Lieutenant Yudan volunteered to lead the strike team before anyone asked him. He was young for an officer, only 25, but he had trained with the Special Forces before joining the Space Fleet. When Admiral Jin explained the mission, Yudan simply nodded and asked how many people he could take. 12, Jin said. 6 Marines, 6 scientists. Dr. Yunmi will handle the computer work. You'll need to get her to the central processing core and keep her alive while she uploads the virus. Dr. Yoon-mi was a small woman with thick glasses who looked like she belonged in a laboratory, not on a battlefield. But she had written the virus code herself, working for 18 hours straight without sleep. The program is simple, she explained to you, Dan. It doesn't attack their system. It just reminds them that they can think individual thoughts. The plan was dangerous and probably impossible. The strike team would have to fight their way through a ship full of creatures that wanted to eat them, find the central brain of the entire swarm, and upload a computer virus to an alien system they barely understood. If they failed, humanity's first contact with alien life would end with everyone dead. Dan looked at his team as they prepared their equipment. Marine Sergeant Lee Jun was checking his assault rifle for the third time. Corpsman Ko Min was packing medical supplies she probably would not live long enough to use. The 6 scientists were trying to look brave, but their hands shook as they loaded their data tablets. Remember, Dan told them, we're not going in there to kill everything we see. We're going to help them remember who they used to be. The insertion was the easy part. While the main fleet kept the swarm ships busy, Dan's team flew a small shuttle directly into the docking bay of the command vessel. The ship's defenses ignored them because they looked like debris from the battle. Inside the bioship, everything was wrong. The corridors were made of what looked like living metal that pulsed like a heartbeat. The walls were covered with veins that carried glowing fluid instead of blood. Strange sounds echoed through the passages, like whispers in a language no human could understand. This way, Dr. Yoon-mi said, reading her scanner. The central processing core should be at the center of the ship. They fought their way through creatures that looked like walking nightmares. Some had too many arms. Others had faces where their stomachs should be. But Dan, noticed something strange. The creatures fought with perfect coordination, but they never seemed angry or afraid. They attacked like machines following a program. As they got deeper into the ship, they found something that made everyone stop and stare. The walls were covered with images. Pictures of cities and families and children playing in gardens. Pictures of creatures that looked almost like the monsters. They had been fighting, but different. Happier, individual. These are memories, Dr. Yoon-mi whispered. The swarm remembers what they used to be. The central processing core was a room the size of a cathedral, filled with pulsing brain tissue connected to millions of cables. In the center was a computer interface that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Dr. Yoon-mi ran to the interface and began connecting her equipment. I need 5 minutes, she called out. The swarm creatures poured into the room like an angry tide. Dan and his marines formed a circle around the doctor, firing their weapons and buying her the time she needed. Sergeant Lee Jun took a hit to the shoulder, but kept fighting. Corpsman Ko Min dragged wounded scientists to safety behind the brain computer. The virus isn't destructive, Dr. Yoon-mi shouted over the noise of gunfire. It's liberating. It will. Let them remember what they chose to forget. The upload bar on her screen crawled toward completion. 90%, 95, 90-8. As the upload finished, Dan felt the massive ship shudder around them. The attacking creatures suddenly stopped moving. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then, throughout the swarm network, millions of minds experienced something they had not felt in thousands of years. The ability to think for themselves. The change began. The change began in the command ship and spread, like fire through dry grass, in the central processing core. The creatures that had been attacking Lieutenant Dan's team suddenly stopped moving. Their many eyes blinked slowly, as if they were waking up from a very long dream. One of them, a tall creature with 6 arms and gray skin, looked down at its hands with wonder. I remember, it said in a voice like grinding metal. I remember my name. I was called Kethmer. I had children once. The virus moved through the swarm's network faster than light, jumping from ship to ship through their shared consciousness. Millions of minds that had thought as one for thousands of years suddenly remembered what it felt like to be individuals. On bioship after bioship, the same scene played out. Creatures stopped in the middle of whatever they were doing and stood still, experiencing thoughts that belonged only to them. Some fell to their knees and wept. Others screamed in joy or confusion. Many just stood quietly, trying to understand what had happened to them. Captain Na Yeon watched from the bridge of her destroyer as the massive swarm fleet began to break apart. Ships that had moved in perfect formation just minutes before now drifted in different directions. Some moved away from the battle entirely. Others approached the human and Confederation vessels slowly, broadcasting messages on open channels. "This is ship-mind. No. This is Velkoth," came one transmission. "I remember now. We were not always like this. We chose to join the collective mind to survive the death of our world, but the choice became a prison. Thank you for giving us back our voices." Dr. Yunmi sat in the medical bay of the New Soul, getting treatment for the cuts and burns she had received during the mission, but she was not thinking about her injuries. She was listening to the communications from the former swarm ships, and tears were running down her face. "They're talking to each other," she told Admiral Jin Sato when he came to check on her. "Ship to ship, individual to individual. They haven't done that in millennia. Some of them are remembering family members they lost. Others are making plans to rebuild their civilization." Not all of the swarm chose to leave the collective. Many decided to stay connected to the shared mind, but now it was a choice rather than a prison. They could think individual thoughts when they wanted to, and join the group mind when they needed to work together. The hunger that had driven them to consume entire star systems faded as empathy returned to their thoughts. "We will not eat other worlds anymore," transmitted one of the larger bioships. "We remember now what it feels like to lose our homes. We will not do that to others." 3 days after the battle, Admiral Veltar found Admiral Jin Sato standing on the observation deck of the Eternal Harmony. Through the large windows, they could see a sight that would have been impossible to imagine a week before. Human ships, Confederation vessels, and former swarm bioships were floating together peacefully. Small shuttles moved between them as crews shared technology and stories. "I have lived for 200 years, Velthar said quietly. "I have seen wars and peace, the rise and fall of civilizations, but I have never seen anything like this." Jin watched as a group of young Confederation engineers floated in spacesuits next to a bioship, learning how to grow metal instead of building it. "What do you mean?" "Your species taught us something we had forgotten," Velthor explained. "That sometimes the greatest weapon is not superior technology or overwhelming force, but the courage to offer hope to those who have lost it." Jin smiled, but his expression was thoughtful. "We learned something too. That we're not alone in believing everyone deserves a second chance." A small shuttle approached the observation deck window. Inside, they could see Lieutenant Yu Dan and several members of his strike team sitting next to creatures that had once been their enemies. They were sharing food and trying to communicate using hand gestures and simple words. "The Confederation Council has made a decision," Velthor said. "We are offering Earth full membership in our alliance. You would have access to all our technology, all our knowledge, all our worlds." Jin was quiet for a long moment. When humanity had first reached the stars, they had dreamed of finding advanced civilizations that would welcome them as equals. Now that dream was coming true, but in a way nobody had expected. "We accept," Jin said finally. "But we want you to know that we're not interested in conquering anything. We just want to help when help is needed." Velthor's 4 eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. "I think that is exactly why we want you as allies." In the months that followed, the galaxy began to change. The former swarm ships helped repair the worlds they had damaged. Human engineers worked with alien scientists to develop new technologies. The Confederation grew stronger as more species joined, attracted by the story of the tiny fleet that had saved everyone by believing in second chances. And in the deep spaces between stars, other civilizations heard the story and began to hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe was becoming a kinder place.